The Genuine Article. Discussion and commentary based on articles from JACC.
Hello, I'm Tony DeMaria, the editor of JACC, and welcoming you to another issue of The Genuine Article. And today we're going to be talking to Dr. John Webb, and John is well known to everyone. I think he's really been one of the major pioneers in the percutaneous placement of prosthetic valves, particularly aortic valves, and he's got a paper in our forthcoming focus issue on valvular heart disease on the latest developments in technique for positioning prosthetic aortic valves percutaneously. John, why don't you tell us about this advance?
Well, I thank you very much for having me here. I think there's a number of advances coming along, and we just described one of them at a period of time, in particular with the balloon expandable valves, the steady improvement in terms of the valve itself, with the development of the new SAPIEN valve, and more recently even the SAPIEN XT valve, which allow lower and lower profile systems, and newer delivery catheters that are less traumatic and lower profile. And this is really, I think, the development. We described the experience with 25 patients utilizing a new delivery system with the balloon expandable valve, and success in all 25 and no mortality in this high-risk group. So I think that's in and of itself is a statement that this technology is arriving.
Well, it's been of interest that there have been some technical issues whether or not one could get the catheter around the aortic arch without dislodging atheroemboli and the difficulty with which one might cross the aortic valve. Have you solved a lot of those issues so that percutaneous...
Well, I think this is improving. I think this is improving dramatically as the devices get smaller and as they get less traumatic tips. We can pretty routinely get around the aortic arch. Device profile and sheath size is still an issue, although systems are now available down to 18 French in size, which means that most patients are amenable to transarterial valve implantation. But there are other opportunities for putting the valve in now. There's the transapical approach, and more people are also using a subclavian approach, open cut down on the subclavian artery. So almost all patients are at least potential candidates for transcatheter.
But it would certainly be most desirable if we could use a femoral artery approach, I would think, and that would potentially expand the indications from the patients who are inoperative candidates at the moment to higher risk patients, which is what you're reporting on in this paper.
Well, I think currently more than half of patients that we see are technically candidates for transarterial valve implantation, and as device size goes down, I think the great majority of them will be candidates for a transarterial procedure.
How does this new valve that you've been working with compare with some of the alternate valves that are being used, like the core valve?
Well, I think these are both very good valves, certainly better than the valves the patients come to us with. Typically, with either of these types of valves, valve area goes from, say, 0.6 square centimeters with aortic stenosis up to around 1.6, 1.7 square centimeters after implantation of the new valve. And that's true of the Cribier-Edwards valve, the SAPIEN valve, the newer SAPIEN XT balloon expandable valve, and the core valve. They all have somewhat comparable valve areas. They have excellent hemodynamics. These valves, remember, don't have sewing rings, so they tend to have better hemodynamics than surgical valves that would be put in similar sized patients. We have some data to show that in the case match study.
Well, I was really impressed. This paper you have impressed. 30 patients all successfully treated with, as you say, a change in valve area up to about 1.6 square centimeters. Where do you see the field going, and in what time frame?
Well, I think this was 25 patients, and although we had no mortality in this high-risk group, I would have to say that this is a brief vignette, and I have no misconceptions, but that there will be mortality with this procedure. It's not without risks, as is conventional surgery, but the risks differ. I think, though, that with time, the risks will continue to fall, and we're looking at a procedure that routinely should have a mortality that's, I believe, comparable with surgery in even perhaps lower risk groups. We're not ready to be doing lower risk patients who are good candidates for aortic valve surgery, but within 5 years, I think that's going to be happening, and we'll see more procedural 30-day mortality rates in the low single digits much more routinely. This procedure is becoming much more widespread. There'll be over 2,000 this year alone, and growth is forecast to be quite dramatic over the next 5 years.
Long-term follow-up?
Well, long-term follow-up's a problem. You know, the longest-term follow-up we have is anecdotal, out to 5 years. We have many patients out to 4 years now in Vancouver. We continue to follow. Interesting, there's really been no late structural valve failure reported as yet with either of these types of valves. So they appear to be relatively durable. Certainly for the patient group we're doing now, they're adequately durable. Will they last as long as surgical valves? I think it's not likely that they will, because there is a price you pay for crimping and compressing these valves. There is potentially some damage to the tissue, but we appear to be talking about perhaps 10-year valves. I guess we'll have to wait 10 years to find out.
Well, it's certainly very, very encouraging. The field is moving rapidly, and thanks very much for sharing your own progress with us. For the Genuine article, I'm Tony DeMaria.